Good evening, friends. I am Dr. D.G. Shahane, Department of English, SMP Mahavidyalaya, Nathepute. Today we are going to discuss a critical essay, Tradition and Individual Talent, from literary criticism. I would like to give you the critical analysis of this present essay to know it very well. At the outset, I would like to give you brief information about T.S.Eliot. Thomas Stearns Eliot was the most towering and greatest learned man of the 20th century. He enjoyed a long span of life for literary production. He achieved a distinction as a poet, playwright, journalist, and critic. He has influenced the course of modern poetry more than any other poet of the 20th century. Eliot was one of the poet critics of the age. His critical formal declaration, firstly published in the form of essays and articles in many journals and periodicals. Such a great personality was born on 20th September 1888 at St. Louis, Missouri, an industrial city in USA. His father was a brick trader and did not like to go to church. But his mother, Charlotte Stearns, was an enthusiastic social worker and a writer of caliber. His grandfather was of a man who had interest in academy. He became a founder member of Washington University. He had also written a lot of religious writings. So there was the greatest influence on Eliot's personality of his grandfather and of his own mother. They had contributed a lot to his development as a writer and especially as a religious poet. Instead of this, Eliot had inherited a number of important factors from his ancestors, so that his personality was the versatile personality in the field of literature as well as literary criticism. Eliot is a great force in modern English literature. He had a complex and many-sided personality. He was a classicist, traditionalist, a great innovator, a critic, a social thinker, a philosopher, and a mystic. Such a great personality died on 4th January 1965 in London. Friends, this is the brief information about life of T.S. Eliot. Now, I would like to focus on particularly on the critical analysis of the present essay, Tradition and Individual Talent, with reference to these points on the PPT. The first point is the essay Tradition and Individual Talent is a manifesto of Eliot's critical creed. How this is a manifesto of Eliot's critical creed? This thing we are going to take into consideration here. The present essay of Eliot, Tradition and Individual Talent, has been called a manifesto of Eliot's critical principles. A manifesto is a declaration of the principles, aims, and objectives of a person or a group of persons, say a political party. In this essay, Eliot has discussed certain principles and theories which he developed further in his later essays. These theories form the basis of all the future criticism of Eliot, whether literary or social, whether on individual writers or on the nature and function of literature. This essay is the framework for the numerous critical essays which subsequently flowed from his pen. It is a seminal essay containing all his future theories in the germ. It is a declaration of his critical creed, hence, we can very well call it his manifesto. Friends, I would like to focus on the second point, that is faith in tradition and objective authority. The essay states his theory of tradition and his theory of impersonality of poetry, and these two theories form the basis of his subsequent criticism. Eliot called himself a classicist in literature, and this essay contains a full exposition of his classicism. A classicist believes in some external objective authority to which an artist must conform. Eliot too rejects the romantic cult of the inner voice and clearly states that the poet must conform to tradition. He must have the historic sense, the sense of tradition. He must acquire this tradition with painstaking efforts. He must be aware not only of the pastness of the past, but also of its presence. He says, not only the best, but the most individual parts of his work may be those in which the dead poets, his ancestors, assert their immortality most vigorously. Eliot rejects the romantic cult of individuality and stresses the classical principles of adherence to some outside authority. He takes the whole literature of Europe from Homer down to his own day to be a single literary tradition, and it is to this tradition that a new writer must conform. Now, I would like to deliver brief summary on the next point, that is dynamic conception of tradition. However, his conception of tradition differs from that of the classics in one important respect. For the classics, the past was dead and unchanging. For Eliot, the past lives on in the present and influences and directs poets and writers in the present. Besides this, the past itself is changed and modified whenever a really new work of art is created. The existing monuments form an ideal order among themselves, which is modified by the introduction of the new, I mean the really new work of art among them. The past is altered by the present as much as present is directed by the past. So, this is a brief critical analysis of these 3 points. Now, I would like to turn towards the next point, which is important in this essay, Tradition and Individual Talent, that is extinction of personality, how to acquire it. Besides his emphasis on the poet's conformity to an objective authority, T.S.Eliot is also a classicist in his theory of the impersonality of poetry. The Romantics believed that poetry is an expression of powerful passion, or it has its origin in emotions recollected in tranquility. They laid stress on the personality of the poet, but according to T.S. Eliot's point of view, he rejects the theory that poetry is an expression of the personal emotions and feelings of the poet. In his view, the process of an artist's maturity is the process of the extinction of his personality. In the beginning, the artist may express his personality, but the maturer he grows, the greater would be the depersonalization of his art. T.S. Eliot says here, I quote, "The progress of an artist is a continual self-sacrifice, a continual extinction of personality." Unquote. This extinction of personality is to be achieved in 2 ways. First, he must acquire the sense of tradition and surrender himself completely to the influence of the writers of the past. And secondly, he must be lost completely in the work he has to do it. So, this is an explanation of this point, extinction of personality, how to acquire it. Now, I would like to analyze or deliver explanation on the second point, that is poetic process, organization of disparate experiences. Eliot rejects romantic subjectivism, and in order to explain his theory of impersonality of poetry, compares the poet's mind first to a catalytic agent and then to a jar or receptacle. Just as 2 gases combine to form a new compound in the presence of a catalytic agent, so also the mind of a poet is a catalytic agent in the presence of which varied feelings and emotions fuse into new combinations. The mind of the poet may be compared to a jar or receptacle to which are stored varied emotions and experiences which combine to form new wholes at a particular moment when poetic creation begins. But Eliot does not explain what that particular moment is or what that element or particle is which sets off the poetic process. This is a mystery, something mystical, incapable of precise, logical, verbal formulation. Eliot's theory of poetry has a touch of the romantic in it, despite all his classicism. Now, this point ends here. I would like to discuss the next point, the artistic emotion, its impersonality. Thus, in Eliot's view, poetry is not an expression of emotion but an organization of varied emotions into new wholes. And the emotions expressed in poetry need not be the personal emotions of the poet. The poet need never have suffered or experienced those emotions. He might have acquired them through his study. As a matter of fact, Eliot distinguishes between the man who experiences and suffers and the artist, the poet who creates. The artistic emotion, the significant emotion, is different from the personal emotion of the artist. The more perfect the artist, the more completely separate in him will be the man who suffers and the mind which creates. So, this is an explanation of this last point, and now I would like to focus on the next point, that is intensity and concentration. Further, Eliot tells us that the greatness of a work of art does not depend upon the greatness or the intensity of the emotions expressed therein. It is the intensity of the poetic process, the pressure under which creation takes place, which counts. The intensity of poetry is quite different from the intensity of the emotion expressed therein. Poetry is not recollection, it is concentration, a concentration of numerous and varied experiences, and this concentration takes place unconsciously. Eliot then hastens to point out that in the writing of poetry there is much that is conscious and deliberate. But a bad poet is conscious where he should be unconscious, and unconscious when he shall be conscious. Thus, poetry is not all spontaneous, there is conscious and deliberate effort in the making of a poem. But Eliot does not explain when an artist should be conscious and when he should be unconscious. Here ends this point. Now, I would like to discuss the next point, poetry and escape from personal emotions. Eliot described this point very emphatically. Eliot does not deny personality and emotion to a poet. The poet has a personality, he has emotions, but poetry is not an expression of his personality or of his personal emotions, as the Romantics believe. Rather, poetry is an escape from personality and personal emotions. It is through total absorption in his art that an artist can forget his personal self. The artist can achieve impersonality by surrendering himself entirely to the work to be done, and he will know what is to be done only if he has acquired a sense of tradition. So, this is a very simple explanation, analysis of this poetry is an escape from personal emotions is made by T.S.Eliot. Friends, I am focusing on the last point, that is conclusion. Eliot has a great gift of phrasing. T.S. Eliot's classicism and his theory of impersonality of poetry find their full and complete expression in this essay. As most of his later criticism, both general and practical, is but an enlargement of these two concepts, we would be justified in calling this essay a manifesto of T.S. Eliot's critical creed. We may not agree with him in entirely. He may be vague and mystical at places, but there is no denying the peculiar charm and power of his essay. According to Clive Bell, Eliot for his power of phrasing, and the essay is full of clear cut, memorable, and trenchant phrases. The essay is classical not only its content but also in its language. Eliot's classical passion for formal perfection is reflected in the beauty and almost Shakespearean felicity of expression of the essay. So, this is the conclusion of this present essay, Tradition and Individual Talent, in brief. I mean, this is critical analysis of this full essay. Thank you very much for joining this lecture and providing me the patience to listen me carefully. Thank you very much.